Welcome to the 700 Club. Cars could be paralyzed. Airplanes could fall from the sky, and power would vanish in a flash. All this and more devastation could happen if the U.S. is hit with an electromagnetic pulse bomb.
Well, analysts warn such a strike is possible, perhaps even likely. Gary Lane explains what these attacks are and how the U.S. should be preparing for them.
An electromagnetic pulse bomb, or EMP, is a nuclear weapon designed to explode high up in the atmosphere and knock out a country's electrical power grid.
Hits the Earth's surface, feeds into our electrical wiring, it starts shorting out the entire power grid. If they launch 3 missiles, eastern, central, western United States, it would shut our grid down permanently.
Historian Dr. William Forstchen is a New York Times best-selling author and expert on EMPs. His new novel is 5 Years After, a political thriller about the aftermath of such an attack. Most people assume Russia or China would be the countries most likely to target the U.S. with an EMP. However, Forstchen believes North Korea is the more likely culprit. Nuclear weapons expert the late Peter Pry agreed. 5 years before his death in 2022, Pry warned that Kim Jong-un's launch of a high-altitude ballistic missile was a test of North Korea's EMP capabilities against the United States.
The Japanese and South Korean military both described it as practicing for an EMP attack because it was burst on ascent deliberately by the North Koreans when it was at an altitude of about 71 kilometers.
The higher the altitude of the missile, the wider the area of destruction. Pry explained how it would devastate an unprepared United States of America.
Cars would be paralyzed. Airplanes could fall out of the sky. You'd have natural gas pipeline explosions, nuclear reactor overloads. And worst of all, if you had a protracted blackout, it would be a serious threat to the survival of the American people.
No electricity means no pumps to provide enough water needed to irrigate and grow crops. And since America only has a 30-day reserve food supply, 90% of the population would likely die within 1 to 2 years of the EMP attack. So what can be done to protect the nation? Recent legislation sets aside $13 billion to upgrade the U.S. energy grid. But finding the needed replacement parts may be difficult.
All those spare parts we need, the big transformers, where do you think they're made? China. We farmed out all the components of our electrical grid decades ago.
Forstchen says history proves that societies always use the weapons they develop. He warns the United States cannot sit back and assume an EMP attack will never happen. Why do you think this is likely even imminent?
Sooner or later, somebody's going to try to do this. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but at some point it will happen.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Well, these are things that are literally straight out of science fiction movies or terrorist attack movies, and when you see that it would be absolutely devastating, you just wonder. I grew up in the nuclear age. I remember taking the drills in grammar school where we all get underneath the desk, and then had a chemistry teacher in high school say, if there's ever a nuclear attack, run outside and try to catch it, because you don't want to be alive after it's all done. It will be absolutely devastating. With that, we've seen that this mutually assured destruction, we haven't seen a detonation in wartime since World War II and the 2 bombs that were on Japan. Hopefully, we can trust one another that we wouldn't use this kind of technology. Because in this mutually assured destruction, if the entire economy of the United States goes under, well, then everybody's going to go with it. In other news, tens of millions of Americans are facing severe weather, everything from extreme heat to flash floods. John Jessup has that story and more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. And the heat has been brutal in some areas, well over 100 to even 110 degrees for weeks. Along with that have come the storms bringing those flash floods. And as if that wasn't enough, tornadoes striking America's heartland. CBN's Brody Carter has this look at the dangerous weather hitting so much of the country.
No way! Cleanup underway after at least 11 confirmed tornado touchdowns reported throughout Chicagoland Wednesday caught locals by surprise, leaving cars smashed and parking lots littered with debris. Multiple tornadoes at Chicago area airports forced passengers to seek shelter, leaving hundreds of flights grounded.
We could hear all the cracking of the roof being tore off, and we looked out the window up there, and then the power lines fell down.
In the south, dangerous flash flooding slammed parts of Mississippi. One town received over half a foot of rain. Overflowing rivers closed several major roads and businesses in neighboring Alabama.
All hands on deck to get sandbags made to save the store.
Vermont is asking President Biden for disaster relief after historic flooding swept through the state Monday and Tuesday, with more strong storms and up to 4 more inches of rain this weekend.
We're now expecting severe thunderstorms, which could bring more flash flooding, hail, and even the threat of a tornado.
At least one person is dead from Vermont's flooding. The public is being asked to stay out of rivers and streams as floodwaters recede.
It's filled with chemicals, oil, waste, and more. It's simply not safe.
But America's top weather killer is not tornadoes, flooding, lightning, or even hurricanes.
It wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't so humid.
It's the heat, which claims the lives of more than 150 Americans on average each year. The expanding heat waves in recent weeks have prompted alerts for 115 million people in 15 states, from Florida to California. Manual laborers in North Carolina have changed their work schedules to try and beat the heat. In Phoenix, 14 consecutive days with temperatures of 110 degrees or more, closing in on its record of 18 days. El Paso, Texas is sweating through nearly 30 days above 100 degrees.
There was somebody that had a heat stroke and possibly, I think they died.
And the heat is especially tough on the homeless. In California, water, shelter, and shade are all anyone can do to keep cool.
I don't know how anyone can do it, really. I feel so bad, and yet there's not much I can do.
And the extreme heat can be worse depending on where you live, with experts saying urban areas can hold more heat than rural communities. And a lack of cooler air at night can make heat waves even deadlier. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Praying for much needed relief. Well, here in Washington, Republicans are criticizing the Secret Service after it announced it has closed its investigation into how a small bag of cocaine got into the White House, saying it found no fingerprints or DNA and that surveillance video did not provide any leads. Republicans calling the conclusion a failure of the agency, with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy saying there is no equal justice.
Anything revolving around Biden Inc. gets treated different than any other American, and that's got to stop.
The White House has said very little about the incident, saying the Secret Service would get to the bottom of it. Well, a heartwarming moment at this week's ESPYs Awards from ESPN, with athletes across the sports spectrum gathering in Los Angeles to celebrate the past year in sports. The awards show hit the height of emotion with an appearance by Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin. A tearful Hamlin presented the Pat Tillman Award for service to the team's training staff, whose efforts saved his life after he went into cardiac arrest during a Monday Night Football game in January. The Bills' head athletic trainer humbly accepted the award, giving glory to God.
By the grace of God and divine intervention, we had the best outcome we could have prayed for or imagined.
Hamlin called the medical staff his heroes, saying they're bonded for life. Gordon, I'm just still struck and in awe of this young man's testimony.
What happened on that field was absolutely devastating. I was watching that game, and the NFL became the National Faith League, where people were praying. They were praying on the field. They were praying in the stands. I was praying at home. Announcers were praying live on air, and it's wonderful the prayers got answered. The medical community did their part, God did his part, and we're seeing it today. It's wonderful, and it's a wonderful testimony and a wonderful thing that God has done.